Our topic today is westward expansion. Before we begin any new information, I want to discuss what we already know. We know that in winning the Revolution, the colonies have gained independence from Britain. Through the meetings of the Constitutional Convention, America's government is established. From here, America begins to build itself as a nation. Now, in small groups, we are going to complete KWL charts to organize what we know, what we want to know, and later we will complete them with what we have learned. Now that we have discussed what we know, I'd like you to know what our learning goals are, that is, what we will learn. One major point of focus for us will be understanding the process of expansion and conquest, how and why expansion occurred. We will learn the outcome of removing Native Americans from their homes and what life on reservations was really like. We will learn the ideas behind Manifest Destiny and its consequences. Another very important event we will discuss is the Mexican-American War and how the U.S. victory led to one of the most devastating wars for our country, the Civil War. Finally, we will learn the circumstances of the Louisiana Purchase and the gains of the purchase. There were several reasons why westward expansion occurred. One was the fact that the colonies were growing. The more people you have, the more space you need to sustain them. Another was the abundant resources in the West, such as land or gold. Manifest Destiny, which was the religious idea behind the push westward, as well as many other new opportunities. Manifest Destiny was a religious idea, the belief that it was Americans' right given by God to conquer the West. It began around the 1830s and 40s. Until the 30s and 40s, expansion had been a great deal slower. The country expanded west in many ways, the most devastating being through war and the massacre of native tribes. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 greatly increased territory of the United States, as did the Mexican-American War in 1846. Building the Transcontinental Railroad, which cut some of the danger and most of the time to travel west. Until the railroad, wagon trains, infamously the Oregon Trail, were used. The conquest of native tribes occurred bit by bit through western expansion. The tribes were seen as obstacles. They had established homes all across the continent. These were homes Americans felt was their right to take through the ideas of Manifest Destiny. The Homestead Act of 1862, which President Lincoln passed, gave the settlers the right to 160-acre plots of land if they lived and worked on it for 5 years. Because this land was already home to native tribes, removal and genocide became acceptable practices. Around the same time that westward expansion really took off, the Indian Removal Act was signed in 1830. It was legislation for forced removal of the tribes. The infamous Trail of Tears was part of this act. The tribes appealed to the Supreme Court and won. President Jackson, however, forces the tribes out of their homes anyway. The Cherokee were forced from their homes in the southeast states to Oklahoma. This relocation lasted from 1838 to 1839. On the way, through sickness, hunger, and cold, 1/3 of the group would die. In the process of location, the tribes were displaced. The reservation system was widely used. This system was a process where government allotted a small portion of the tribe's homeland, usually, and through threats, violence, and coercion, forced the tribes onto reservations. Another process of conquest was massacres, such as the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. Boarding schools were used, where children were taken from their homes and families in much the same fashion as the tribes were forced onto reservations. The two quotes on this slide show the mainstream idea of the nation, and unfortunately, sometimes today still. All of this was due to misunderstanding, ignorance, and racism. Now we are going to discuss the effects of conquest on the tribes. As the country expanded, most tribes were forced onto reservations. On the reservations, they faced starvation, disease, and their medicine men were not allowed to practice, and their religion was prohibited. They were told to make a living farming, but reservation land was not suitable for farming. Everything was taken from them, making them dependent on the U.S. government. Many times food and supplies were late. The agents on reservations either hated Native people, their job, or both. From the picture below, we can see that the situation hasn't changed a lot on some reservations. This picture was taken on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. The Louisiana Purchase was also an important part of expansion. Prior to the purchase, it was French territory. At this time, Thomas Jefferson is president. In 1803, this land was purchased for $15 million. The reason this was important was for use of the Mississippi River as a trade route. The Mexican-American War was important because the United States gained a very large piece of land that the U.S. felt needed to be settled. James Polk is president at the time. The war lasted from 1846 to 1848 with a U.S. victory, and with the victory, Mexico is reduced by half. The U.S. gained Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California land masses. The victory led to the debate of whether this large territory would be free or slave states. The Wilmot Proviso proposed all new territories would be free. This bill does not pass and leads to further division of interest between North and South. From this point, the United States is steady on a path to civil war. Now let's review what we have learned. We know the idea behind manifest destiny. What was this idea? We discussed why expansion happened. What was one reason? The effects on Native Americans we discussed at length. What was one effect? The Louisiana Purchase was very important. Why? And finally, we covered the controversy after the Mexican-American War. Explain this controversy.